Hello everyone who's joining our Blueback webinar on Patrol Data Management. I'm looking forward to a good session, and hopefully we'll have a few questions at the end. Let me go over just a few brief things on how to participate today. This is a GoToMeeting open session, and hopefully you have your control panel up. You can open and close that with the orange arrow. And you can view as a full screen via the way that's described now. By default, everyone is muted. I am watching the text dialog, so if you do have some questions there, you can submit them during the presentation. As I said in the introduction, we will have a Q&A session at the end of this. When you're registered, we will provide a link to the recording within about a day. And of course, we're at www.blueback-reservoir.com. So the main things we're going to talk about today is just a very brief review of the Tracker architecture, some project discovery tools using the Tracker admin and Excel, directly connecting to the Tracker database with Excel, and then finally some automating task scanning with the task scheduler. So very briefly, you're probably all familiar with this. Tracker runs via the Tracker admin. Of course, you can access that via the command line, which is a slightly differently named program than admin, or the actual interactive program, and we'll touch on both of those today. We do require a Patrol plugin to do actual scanning. Of course, we scan to disks. We write that out to Microsoft SQL Server. We'll touch on some querying and reporting today via an Excel connection, which you can see in the upper right corner of this slide. And then I will not be touching on spatial today. However, there's another webinar coming up where we do actually talk about those spatial and map building via ArcGIS. So one of the very first things you do in trying to figure out what's happening in your Patrol environment would be a project discovery. So kind of, I guess, the issue you would have at that point, you've got this unknown disk volume and you're trying to figure out a good tracking plan for that. So the way we recommend doing that is in the Tracker version 4, and of course it's carried forward to version 5, there's a tool built in that really allows you to check your bulk data against the database. But since it's a scanning tool, there's a clever little way to use that to get an idea what's going on your disk volume. So the technique would be we'd open the Tracker admin, select the Seismic File Manager. We're going to enter a search pattern. We're going to get some data back. We export that data to Excel. We select it, and then we do a pivot table to get accounts. And based on that, we're going to come up with a scan strategy. So I'm going to actually jump into our project manager now. And this is the Tracker admin. I happen to be in version 5 here. And we're going to come down here to the Seismic File Manager. And you can see by default it's set up to actually do its job, and that's looking for seismic files. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to enter *.pet here, and then I'm going to look for a path out on my hard drive, and I'm going to go ahead and select my computer and my D drive here, and I'm just going to go back up and select the entire D drive. And now I'm going to go ahead and scan that. And it's a pretty quick process. Of course, we can tell it's working here. And I now know that on my computer, I've got about 100 files, so I'll open this up to 250. We found about 176 files. I had a few little problems there, but nothing to worry about. And as is standard for all our codes, I'm just going to go ahead and select that, and I'll take my selected rows out to the clipboard. And it's a personal preference. There's any number of ways you can do that, but I prefer to copy them to the clipboard. So I've got Excel up and running here, and I'm just going to do a simple paste now, and we'll go ahead and put that out. I'm going to highlight those rows, go ahead and go to my home here. We'd like to format that, and I like to use auto column width. So the next little tidbit I like to do is I'll highlight all my rows. I'll go into my data tab, and I'm going to do a sort here, and my data has headers. So I'm going to sort by full name. And what that allows us to do is we can start to see some patterns here. So I've got clearly this directory called form merge. I've got another one called Patrol backups. I've got some Patrol projects there. Got this thing called scan2. I've got another symlink test. So we can see some patterns, and I know about how long a scan takes me. So I'd like to get an idea the project count in each one of those directories. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is we'll select this data, and I'm going to use the shift and down technique to do that. I'm going to insert a pivot table. I've already selected my data. I'm going to go ahead and put that on a new worksheet. And here I build my pivot table. What I'd like to look at is my directories. And then I'd like to look at my count of directories. And then I'd like to go ahead and do a quick sort on those. So we're going to go to more sort options, and we're going to sort ascending by our actual count. Actually, let's sort them by descending by our project count. So this gives me a very good idea of how I'd like to build my scan strategy. The fastest I've ever seen scans run are about a minute a scan. I know if I've got 8 hours of time, I got about 480 minutes. So I can probably do about 400-ish scans in an evening. And this gives you an idea how you might want to break those down to get through your projects in an overnight kind of method. So I'm going to come back here. Let me turn back on my PowerPoint, and I'll give you a few tips that we've developed about this. So even when we have a fast tool like that scanner, we're not opening up each project, we're just looking for the PET files. If you have really big volumes, it still can take some time. So you should probably think about dividing up the work. Again, like I said, we're going to look for patterns in the path names. I showed you the sort option. Of course, if you wanted to, you could split that even further using some of the data split tools. Although I know I was working on a local D drive, if you can do it, you should always use the full network path, the / drive name, rather than a mapped drive, because the network path will always work. Again, I mentioned think about your times, 8 hours, you got about 480 minutes. The fastest I've ever seen things scans are about a minute a project, because we actually have to open Patrol. Longer times are very, very typical. So I've seen scan times up over 10 minutes to open projects with really big projects. So that kind of gives you both ends of the bounds. And then finally, because you've got a pretty solid idea of the number of Patrol projects you're scanning because you've used this tool, you can compare that against your actual scan list and get an idea how things have run. So that's kind of one of the very basic tasks we do when you're going into a Patrol environment and exploring it for the first time. So assuming you've got that first clean crawl out of the way, the next steps that people tend to do is they tend to think about reporting. The web interface is very, very good for ad hoc reporting, building a single report at a time. However, as you start working in your day-to-day mode, building ad hoc reports every week, you might decide you need to do that in any number of ways. Our database is truly open. You could do it with a TIBCO Spotfire. You could do it into any variety of wiki software, including SharePoint. Or, again, since the database is open, you might just choose to code up something yourself in Excel. So what I'm going to do today is review that technique and one of the first things that you need to do is figure out where your database is. That data lives in Tracker Admin. If you're using Windows authentication, you won't need to have a password for the database. If you're using SQL authentication, you will need to find a password for your database. You're going to bring in, of course, open Excel, go out to the ribbon bar, grab either a table or a view. They're slightly different techniques how those are stored in the database. A table is actually stored in the database. It's the raw data, and that typically necessitates the need for the VLOOKUP. If the data that you're looking for happens to be available directly in the web interface, you're probably going to want to look at a view. And when we get there, there's slightly different icons to load that, and I'll point out that difference. You're actually going to build the report you want to build. I probably won't go into too much about building graphs today. In fact, I won't go into it at all. But I will show you some techniques that you can update those reports with a single click by using the data refresh functions and working with tables inside of Excel rather than the actual cells. And then finally, you're going to take that report and generalize it. Maybe you need to write some other support code in Visual Basic. Maybe just the simple update will work for you. It depends very much on how you're doing your reporting. So we're going to go into our Tracker Admin again, and we're going to look at our configuration, and we're going to look at our database connection. And my connection string happens to be /, which is the equivalent of localhost. My database is called XQL Express, and then the database I'm going to be using today is called Tracker 5 Studio. So pretty safe guess that I've got a studio connection in there somewhere that I've been working with this database. So we're going to go back to our Excel here, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete these two sheets that we had used previously. And now we're going to go into our data tab. We're going to take data from another source, and that source is going to be an SQL server. And my server name is going to be /SQLEX. It's XPRESS, and that's exactly what we found in our web, in our Tracker Admin. And I'm set up to use Windows authentication, so I'm authenticated for the database. It's going to go out, and then as is a very typical case, I've got multiple databases on this instance of SQL server, and as we found in our log, I'm going to go to Tracker 5 Studio. So the icon you see here is for a view, and those views are very, very close to what you see in the web UI. And we're just going to, I'll just show you if you might have a spatial polygon to get out some spatial data, any number of things you can do there. But for purposes of this example, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to grab the data table. So this is an actual raw table, and it has some keys. Again, since this is an example, it's going to give me a nice way to show you how to use an Excel function called VLOOKUP. It's a very powerful function. We use that throughout the data management consulting that we do here. And we're just going to go ahead and finish that. And I'm going to add this to a cell A1 on this worksheet, and there we go. The important thing to notice here is that we've actually added a table. And because we're using tables, that's going to allow us to actually update the data connection. So I'm going to go to name this sheet, and I'm going to call this something like raw data. And I'm going to go to this sheet, and we'll go back to our data. We'll go data from other sources. We'll go for our SQL server again. /SQL Express. And we'll go to the same database. And now this time I'm going to actually get rather than a data table, I'm going to get the project table, which is right here. And we'll go ahead and finish this up, and we'll put that in A1 as well. So now I've got all the projects in my database. Again, I chose to choose data tables. It's a bit of an artificial example because I'm planning on showing you how to do what's called a VLOOKUP. We notice here, and I'll just go ahead and rename this sheet as my project table. Something I like to do here is I like to make a copy of this. We'll create a copy at the end, and this sheet will then become my working report or something like that. So we see here I've got project IDs in my data table, so we know which data is associated with which project. And on my project table, I've got a project ID as well. Again, because I chose to take a table rather than a view, I don't have the project name or the project path. So let's go ahead and import those. I'll add a couple columns to put them in. And here, let's put in my project name. And here, I'll put my project path. Then here, what we're going to do is a function called a VLOOKUP. So we're going to say that's going to equal to a V, if I can type today, a VLOOKUP. And we're going to look for project IDs. And you notice it doesn't put in a cell name. It actually puts in a reference to the table using the square braces and the @project. And now it's asking for a table array to come from. And we're going to go back to our project data, and we see how in this first column here we've got that 15 and we've got the path. And again, if you're not familiar with using tables, it gives you a very odd looking format for a cell reference. It gives you the table name, it tells you it came from SQL Express, gives you the square braces, and now it's saying use all. And what that means is the next time we update, even if I have more or less rows, it will grab all the data that I've imported. So it's a pretty handy function. Here we're looking next for a column index. I know I want name, that's actually the second column over. And then in the weirdness of computer science, we're going to tell it by using false we want an exact match. And we'll close off this formula. And with the magic of Excel, by using tables, it knows to fill out the project name based upon the project ID in this column here, and it fills that out for us automatically. So it's a pretty handy tool, and we'll come over here, we'll copy this formula, and it's going to fill out project name, but we don't want name there, and we know that that happens to be the third column over now. And now I have project path and project name associated with the individual data. Again, it's a bit of a made-up example, but we use this VLOOKUP technique pretty consistently in our data management consulting that we do. The handy thing is, I said about using those tables is if I've done some work in my Tracker database, I go ahead and hit refresh all the tables and all those VLOOKUPs will update automatically. Of course, if we had decided to build graphs from those based upon the tables rather than individual cell ranges, the data in those tables would update automatically. And it's a very powerful technique to build custom reports very quickly and include graphs in them. So let me go ahead and minimize this. We'll go back to our PowerPoint presentation. So a few tips here. You really need to think about why you're in Excel. So if you need a single ad hoc report, the UI is probably really a better way to do it than going out to Excel. You might need to copy data from the UI into Excel. On the other hand, if you're automating a task, and that's a very good reason to use Excel. And sometimes, you know, we can't preview everything that's needed in the web UI. We just can't think for all the tasks our users might want. So you might use this technique to fill a gap in something you can't quite build from the web UI, and that does happen. Excuse me. So we think curiosity is a good thing, and by accessing that data within Excel, it's a very safe way to do it as compared to the SQL Server Management Studio. Just because it's a read-only operation, it's impossible to damage an SQL database by reading only, and then you can play with the data to your heart's content in the safety of Excel. So as I've mentioned a couple times, if you use the table features of Excel and build carefully, you can get those updates with a single click. And again, as I often say to our clients, ProjectTracker is indeed called ProjectTracker. It is not called Project Reporter. People do love their pie charts, especially bosses, and Excel's got a pretty good graphic engine, and there was no need for us to try and duplicate that. So we've gone through a couple tasks already today. We've taken your unknown patrol environment and given you an idea how to get a good one. We've gone through some reporting schemes once you have got that initial crawl done. And the final task we're going to talk about today is adding a crawl to the task manager. So I'm ready to start crawling on a weekly, monthly basis. Maybe it's bi-weekly. You can pick whatever intervals you need, but the way you do that is you add a task via the task scheduler, and the technique to do that is first thing you have to do is, and it sounds obvious, but believe it or not, this is one of the big issues we face, is you actually have to be on the machine where you're going to do the crawl, and you have to have the correct permissions to add tasks to that machine. Often we find in client settings that the work machine that the data manager is using on a daily basis is different than the crawling machine. Of course, you have to build a configuration file. I like to use a search because I always have trouble finding the task scheduler. I'll show you how to do that. And then to add the task itself, you're going to create a basic task, set the times, add the command line options, and finally you're going to test it. And with that, let me go ahead and go into our actual demo here. So one of the things I mentioned is you need to add the command line options. So as you can see, I've got a command window here. We're out to program files, Schlumberger, Patrol, my Patrol install happens to be 2012, extensions, Blueback Project Tracker, and I'm in the correct tracker. Then we're actually going to set up a program called Tracker Crawler Console.exe. Again, we went back to our admin. That's really your command line way to run Tracker admin. If you run that with no options, it goes ahead and gives you a list here, and you can analyze, measure, report, remove, delete it, etc. And those are all dash kind of command line options. It's a very standard format to run in. And if you forget which options are what, you can figure them out that way. And that is of course covered in the manual, and in fact this whole process is covered in the manual. Sometimes we get questions on it, so I thought it'd be a good idea to work through this live in our demo. So another tidbit we need to know is I have a configuration file out here, and it's called test.xml. So what I'm going to do, I happen to have a test out there called Monday test. So let's put this as demo webinar test. So when I actually look at my log files, I will know which log file that this is come out of, and we can see that that's changed down here in the green, and I'm going to go ahead and save that. So I'm going to start my task scheduler now, and that by typing that search in, task scheduler comes up. We'll go ahead and minimize this and this just to get them out of the way, and let's maximize this. So the first thing I do is create a basic task here, and that's going to give me a new window, and we'll call this web in our demo task. And of course, I could type in a description there. Let's run this weekly. And let's run this on Sundays at 8 in the morning is a good time on Sunday. So we'll go ahead and do that. What we'd like to do is start a program. And I'm going to browse for that program. And conveniently, as a demo, I'm in my Schlumberger Petrel, etc. And you have to pay attention here because you've got the crawler exe, and you think off the top of your head that's probably what you want to use. But again, if you pay attention to that example we just ran on the command line, we actually have to use the console mode of the program. So I'm going to go ahead and open that, and I have to add some arguments. We're just going to do a test here. You could choose, scan, analyze, measure, probably the more classic things. You might need to add a few other options in there. If you're doing a rules, you might want to do a dash rules and a dash report, for example. And we know that that came from C:/test.xml. And I'm going to go ahead and add that task and finish up here. And if we come back to my task scheduled library, we can see here I have a demo task. You can get to the run option either, of course, on the run option, or you can right click on the task and run it. And it goes ahead and it does its thing. It opens a window there. And let me go ahead and close this. We'll come back to here. We'll look at our log manager now, and we'll sort them by date added. And we see I've got my demo webinar test that we just added on today's date, and of course that'll be the first run. And we can click on our log, and sure enough, it went out and proved that we can connect to the database there. So with that, let me go ahead and get back into our PowerPoint and give you a few closing comments and the contact information to pick up an actual PowerPoint of these. I know I went through them quite quickly. One of the things that does come up when we set up these scheduling tasks is you really need to think about if you want to do this in a service account or a user account. Generally, in a larger installation, we recommend a service account. Sometimes, if your Petrel installation is much more localized, you might want to do that out of the data manager's user account. It's just a company rules kind of situation. Always have to check your account permissions. I've seen this come up quite often, that a data manager will run things in his personal account, and then the service account either doesn't have access to the drives or it doesn't have access to some of the software, and that can be problematic. Again, I showed you the technique to test. As these are going to run automated test and test again. It's a good idea. And then as you're moving into this maintenance mode, you might want to start thinking about how you would add some governance rules. And then again, as we are in a maintenance mode, eventually you're going to have to start thinking about how you're going to be keeping your database clean. And those tasks you could probably schedule on a longer basis. You might want to schedule some of those tasks monthly to clean up the database. So some of our upcoming events that are happening with Blueback: we've got a user group meeting scheduled May 7th and 8th, and that's in London. We've got a couple of webinars coming up. As I mentioned, the GIS one in particular, that was in my lower right corner of my diagram explaining all the components of Tracker. That's on April 24th. Hopefully you've got an invite for that already. And then an introduction to one of our new products came out right at the end of last year, is the Blueback System Center, and that's on April 29th. Of course, you can register at www.blueback-reservoir.com/DM. So I'd like to thank you for your attendance. I'm not seeing any questions typed in, so with that, we will close.